Tēnā koutou katoa. I'd like to welcome you all to this last paper in Stream 1 of the Australeaks 2021. I would like to introduce you to Pam Peters and Adam Smith from Macquarie University, who are going to be speaking on supporting Indigenous access to online information and family law. Over to you, Pam.
Thanks very much, Tanya, and to all your New Zealand team in organising this highly international conference. It's great to cross so many time zones. That's a real first. I'm speaking from Macquarie on the land of the Wallamatagal people of the Darug Nation, and recognising the great custodianship that they've maintained of our land. I want also to introduce you to Adam, my partner in this project and our research. We work together, and he will be speaking to the inside details of the system a little later. It's also a new phase in our development of a research and development project in terminology, the terminology of family law. And that's a project we've been doing for the Federal Attorney General's Department for a few years. It's a project in terminography and descriptive terminology, hence our being here in a lexicography conference. And it's an initiative to communicate legal meanings to non-legal people. We want to help particularly the members of the public to understand the language of law and aspects of the legal situation in which they maybe are caught up. So let's move to the second slide. Here I'm introducing you to the website that we've been building in this context, building it continuously. We call it Family Law Term Finder, or just Law Term Finder for short. And it's designed to support both first and second language users of English in Australia. Among the L2 communities, of course, there are large numbers with perhaps English as a limited second language, and without, of course, access to legal vocabulary. But the lack of easy access to vocabulary affects all L1 readers too, of all sorts. Anyone who wants to try and understand legal terms and as they are applied in our Australian legal system. So we've created Law Term Finder as a dictionary style resource, and with for the facilities that high quality dictionaries use, using for starters a very large corpus of legal texts. Some of them are high level legislative ones, which is the as it were, the matrix for these terms, but also use of legal terms in teaching and on legal websites. So we get all kinds of registers of legal usage as backdrop to forging the definitions for these terms. The very great advantage of what we're doing is that we can use multimodal features for people who are second language readers or first language readers with low literacy skills. And in this system, we can use audio recordings of material there. We can use tables and diagrams. And it also allows us to provide translation support for L2 speakers. And you'll see in the next slide that we've got up now translations on 8 of the most used community languages in Australia. But the challenge now is to see how we can adapt this system for use with Australia's Indigenous people. This gives you a glimpse of the homepage for Law Term Finder and the opening statement about what its purpose is and how you might use it. But our feature here is the range of community languages that we now have translations in for it. For all the key elements in the page. Users are invited to choose from that list on the left, which is a drop-down menu. And you'll see that it's the name of the language and where appropriate written in the proper script. We now include any languages from Arabic to Korean and to traditional and contemporary Chinese. So these certainly help to bridge the gap with people who are overseas immigrants and perhaps short on their English reading skills. The question of the immigrants is, we think, met by the facilities that are here now. We've carried with us 8 of the main community languages in Australia, using ABS statistics to identify the largest and also the ones that were growing most quickly. And they certainly are the Chinese, particularly mainland Chinese. Arabic is also growing quite substantially, as you might expect. But at least we can offer help to others who speak slightly less sizable communities. And with these languages, for instance, Arabic can be useful to smaller language community languages because Arabic is their second language. And so a number of Middle Eastern immigrants, Dari, for instance, can read Arabic and get more value. So it's a bit of value added by using languages that are sometimes second languages for our immigrants. But this comes back to the question I was beginning to foreshadow. We offer help for bi and multilingual people on the left-hand column, but we hadn't yet addressed the needs of Indigenous speakers, many of whom are bilingual or speak a version of English that is not standard, i.e. Aboriginal English. Can we support them in some way through this website? So this is the kind of thing that we've been working hard on in the last couple of years to find a way of adapting the website, actually redesigning it, it comes down to, because of its various limitations in relation to Indigenous use. One is certainly that it's totally word-based. As you saw that homepage, there's not much help unless you've got a fairly standard solid command of English to start with. And there is multimodal hope in images and in audio, but only when you get inside. So the initial search is hampered. The language and the process may be difficult for other readers as well. And it's certainly a demanding sort of entry point for people with low reading skills. One other problem that we also seek to address in this project is to provide better access for users who have limited internet. Our project was designed very much with desktop landscape plans in mind, and these of course don't go well on the phones, and phones here are the main means of communication with the internet for many, many people, especially Indigenous people. So we were coming to grips with that problem of having a website designed for landscape delivery, and it needed adapting to provide for Indigenous people in particular. So on the right-hand side, you see the various steps we've been taking. We wanted to create a whole new entry point to an Indigenous page, perhaps using an icon and making it much more image-based and less wordy. It goes to an Indigenous page then, or it needs to do this, in order to then have a table of contents, so to speak, that can then be used to divert users into particular words. And it was a matter of developing a set of generic words then for the contents page that would connect to words that you might think of as hypernymic sub-members. The searches, we wanted to create a visual basis, the image plus the word or term, as a way into the dictionary. And in that, we've been exploring the possibilities that each word or term would then consist of an image plus a few words in a simplified English. We're using what elsewhere is called easy read, but we have created our own kind of refinement on it to make for the image more consistency in the images. Some of the easy read use a multiplicity of images of different styles, and we wanted to make a consistency in the images. And the other vital thing is that we're having the website re-engineered as we speak into a fluid grid or a phone-friendly system so that we can get past the limitations of access. So let's advance to the question of how we hope to help Indigenous people access this and the underlying issues there. One of them is the one I've just dealt with, that they have limited access to the internet. The second one that we've introduced is the problem of individual reading skills in English, in standard English being low, and of course the fact that the language of law is hard for anyone, as well as the processes and procedures of English family law. What we wanted to do was provide access to online dictionary information unhampered by uncommon formal words or even standard English words. And so to get in without the verbal filter that is raised by the existing site. One important thing that we need to mention is that the difficulties for second language readers have been, I think, effectively identified by psycholinguistic researchers, that if you have only a limited vocabulary, the semantic pathways between statements are not sort of well fleshed out. And so constructing meaning and coherent meaning from one sentence to the next is a much harder thing and a much less reliable kind of delivery of coherent meaning. And so one of the things we were trying to address in using the visuals as well as simplified English was to try and create these more consistent semantic pathways in the wordy part of the text. Another point of interest is that I think it's well known now that in exploring ideas with Indigenous people, it's better to use narrative connections if you can. And this, quite interestingly, as Lebov famously pointed out, is a kind of default mechanism for discourse construction. You might remember his experiment with getting people to explain the layout of their flats. And instead of using, if you like, the geometry, if it was available, they all talked in terms of walking through the front door and turning to the right for the living room and to the left for the eating room. So it seems to be that narrative discourse development is really a default mechanism, probably for all of us, but particularly important in situations where you have to explain something that might otherwise be a little bit abstract. And so you need, if possible, to develop some sort of continuity of a narrative kind through it. What we did and have been greatly assisted by is some prior work from Western Australia. And this has generated a series of useful cards, they call story cards, and there's the narrative line. And these have been developed, interestingly, on the borders of West Australia and Northern Territory, where the legal systems divide, because being a federation, not all states agree on federal law. And in the case of family law, the West Australians decided they didn't want to go in with the rest, and so they have their own family law code and family law system. But when you cross the border into Northern Territory, you're into federal family law system. And so there are some interesting differences that happen. And for people who live in remote communities close to the border on either side, there are real unfortunate discrepancies and puzzling kind of differences. And they, anyway, in particular, needed some sort of way of bridging this, as well as just a much better kind of information system and support from the field interpreters, the field workers with them. And they, a bit like the workshops that Nick has just so eloquently presented, here we have the kind of thing that was happening on the borders between NT and WA, with communities sitting down with field workers, multilingual field workers, and others concerned with the practicalities of the legal system. And so these people created that large inventory that Blurred Borders consists of, about 360 story cards in the area, in actually 3 areas of law. There's family violence, there's child protection, and there's juvenile justice. And so a big set of cards. So I've mentioned that they were concerned that where it came from, and that the set of story cards covers both legal terms as well as those of mediation. And one of the vital things in this whole area is that there are many pre-court, family law processes to be explored before you go to court. And so the mediation processes are part of the set of cards. And we certainly wanted to capture that for our use on the East Coast. The images, as you'll see, are just simple and effective. They go with people and places involved. They have some ways of indicating the social and legal issues, and anyway, cover quite a lot of ground that we wanted to cover. They were designed to be used with Aboriginal people so that they could ask questions of their field workers or the lawyers or the legal assistants to explore what they know or would like to understand about the legal process. If you look at their website, you'll find that it has the Blurred Borders materials have been reviewed by a number of experts, and that they have been highly commended for the way they were produced and the validity and the value of using them in consultations with Aboriginal people. So regarded as best practice tools. This gives you a view of a couple of the cards. Here, looking at the people, and number one from the family law point of view is, of course, the lawyer. So here you have a kind of generic figure who carries the legal briefcase and a sheaf of papers. The definition, you'll see, if we call it that in dictionary terms, is very much connected with the Aboriginal user. He's the person who can help you with legal problems and talk for you in court. And so these definitions, as you might call them, are very much oriented to that communication of the function of the person in terms that the Indigenous person might like really to know. How will it help me if I have a lawyer approach? And it establishes the connection with the court in a card like this, that the lawyer is really rather further down the track than the mediation personnel. So that one, a fairly simple definition to provide those sorts of information for somebody unfamiliar with the court system. On the right is the counsellor, which is much more in terms of the mediation processes. And here you see the setting is cast very much as an armchair chat. A person who might come to your home, it's not someone you meet in court, someone who might come to your home and is described as someone who helps you talk. They might help you decide what to do or what not to help you, or help you not to feel worried anymore. They might ask you lots of questions, but everything you talk about with them is private. And so it's to explore the roles of the counsellor, several ways in which they might help, and you can see how help turns up many times in that little paragraph. But most importantly, you're not exposing yourself in any dangerous way, because what you say is confidential. And that, of course, is quite a business if you're talking to somebody you don't know and about very private things. So it's also, I should say, written into the family law code that whatever you say to a counsellor, who may sort of take notes, as you can see in the figure on the right, whatever you say is not admissible in court. So that last statement is actually backed up by the legal code. But the person who needs a counsellor doesn't, only wants to know that what they say is confidential. So what you can see here is not, if you like, your standard intentional definition, anything quite like a normal dictionary. It's very much geared to the communicative situation in which these cards are being used, and the functionality of these various elements of the law process for people who desperately need it. The other thing that we might observe is that the word "you" is very freely used in these definitions and sentence-like definitions, the sort of thing that ESL dictionaries introduced us to decades ago, but which are particularly pertinent in this setting. Let me turn now to some of the things we've been doing to adapt the Blurred Borders material so that it's optimal for use in New South Wales on the East Coast, and of course in settings where Aboriginal people live on the fringe of the city. It's urban context. And so there are a number of things that needed to be reviewed and updated there. We do have a lot of cards at our disposal, as I mentioned before, but the two areas that we learn from the Attorney General's Department are the most common focuses of legal cases are in the area of family violence and child protection. And so we took those two, FB and CP, as our brief for that. Our number one task, though, in rethinking the access to these cards was what kind of a macro structure can we create? And it's clearly in this setting, we thought a need for something more like that of the thesaurus, the onomasiological start, a broad entry point in which they can find their needs and move on into semantic details. I note here that in some ways we're an analogue of what I know our New Zealand colleagues are doing so excellently in looking at restructuring dictionaries via kind of a worldview. Now, this is not really available in this specific case and for the Aboriginal people we're working with. So there's no equivalent worldview we can call on. But we can, I think, and we've been endeavouring to do this, to extract a kind of meta-semantic structure from the cards so that we can group them into categories and use a kind of category card as the superordinate for the hyponymic cards. So what you'll see as Adam introduces you to them, that we're putting that kind of macro structure into place. And then that hopefully will lead people, really straightforwardly into the microstructure. We do also have to think hard about the images and their suitability, their cultural suitability for use in the New South Wales urban context. And also to think about the legal adaptation, because things like child protection systems are run a bit differently in each state, and that's one of our issues, to try and adapt the terminology used in the cards where it's specific to the West or the Northern Territory. Our review is certainly going to be taking a long, hard look at the text on the cards as well, and trying to ensure its readability and accessibility as far as possible. The people who worked on the Blurred Borders card have thought a good deal about this, and they've achieved the kind of simplicity and transparency that you would have seen in those definitions I introduced before. The other thing that was a principle for them was to use English that was readily translated into into any Aboriginal language, because it adopted the same kind of a syntactic underlay. And so that's something we wouldn't want to disturb, in as much as it's been carefully designed with translatability in mind. There is one other perspective we have to keep an eye on, and that is how far the text in the cards represents a women's or a men's point of view about the issue. It's also a matter of the images. For instance, in the family violence area, this 90% of the time is a perspective on the law that which women find themselves in, and so we do want to make sure that it captures that. And when it comes to things like rules, like the police orders that go with family violence, those typically are written in the blurred borders cards as if they are speaking of the man's situation of being obliged to keep his distance from the home, or advised in mediation to talk to his kids. And so it's interesting that on that side of the family violence thing, the mending, the next steps, a man's voice encouraging the man would be a good idea. But when it's women who are suffering all kinds of social, financial abuse, to have a man orate that kind of thing is probably unsuitable. These are some of the things we're going to check as we complete the work, but there are some interesting questions in adaptation of the cards that way. So the other thing to confirm is that this project certainly involves extensive consultations with our stakeholders. It starts, as I've just mentioned, with all the background consultation that went into the creation of the Blurred Borders cards. We shall be working with our university centre, the Wallangamaroo Centre, to adapt these things and consider cultural issues relevant to the East Coast and the urban setting, working with staff of Wallangamaroo. And we've had very helpful backup from New South Wales Legal Aid to have a solicitor look at the legal terms to make sure the terminology for the staff is correct. We're looking forward to having Aboriginal voice actors to provide the recordings of the text, and a total usability review of the website, how easy it is to get in and everything, with the help of Legal Aid and, again, Wallangamaroo. Okay, I must step aside now and let Adam take you into the inner workings of our adaptation.
Okay, thanks, Pam. Yeah, I'll just take you for a little quick tour through the site and the changes that we're making. So what we're planning to do with the upgrade for what we're calling here the Indigenous portal is we add a link to the from the main site to the Indigenous portal. That will be provided with the addition of an icon, the gum nut that we're using to identify it on the home page. We've chosen this as a fairly kind of broadly interpretable image that we can use. We did look into the idea of using the Aboriginal flag, but of course there's IP issues over that. So I'll show you the icon we're going to use in a moment. And what will happen then once they get to the Indigenous portal, the links will then all be separate. The search system will be separate from the main term bank, and it will take users through to their own definitions and their own different categories, as Pam has outlined. And we're using a combination of images and easy read English, and some use of a kind of a basic phonetic script. Not sure at this stage how much we'll use that. We might use that at the moment. We've just used it to explain the word easy read on the home page and within the internal pages as well. But we might also use that script to identify some of the head words as well, just to make them clearer to people who don't have that reading ability. So let me take you now to this is basically what the homepage will look like. So this is the Law Term Finder homepage that Pam has already shown you, with the addition of these easy read links. just to note at this stage as well that these mock-ups that I'll show you now are based on screenshots from the desktop version of the site. So we haven't implemented the responsive design yet, and they will look a bit different on mobile phones and other devices. So here you can just see, again, as Pam pointed out, the quite text-heavy homepage, just with the easy read icon, both in the search column and in the central column there. There will be a link, an active link, to take you to the Indigenous portal, or indeed we do consider this as probably a useful resource for other users who don't have a strong command of English. I mean, the focus is obviously for Indigenous users, but it could also be useful for other people who don't have a strong use of English. This little pop-up thing here won't be on the Indigenous portal at all. So there's a little questionnaire asking users about just a few questions about how useful they find it as a resource. We're not going to include that in the new part of the website, but it is there, and we've had some very useful feedback from people about how useful they find, particularly the translation resources within the existing Law Term Finder. So once you've gone from the home page, and to note as well, so once you've gone from here, you are coming to what we will call the homepage of the Indigenous portal, and if there are particular groups who we would expect to be using this particular version of the website, they would obviously be linked directly to this site rather than to the main Term Finder window. So this gives you a mock-up again of the Indigenous portal, as we're calling it. And just to take you through the various elements of this. So in the center of this, we have the 7 category cards that Pam has already outlined to you. So family, support person, safe place, dangerous, next steps, court, orders and rules. They're the 7 that we've got at the moment. And you'll note that most of these have images, and the images, again, taken from the blurred borders model, are very much based around Indigenous perspectives. So, for example, if you look at the family card, that represents the kind of the extended family that's pretty central to Indigenous culture. There are a couple here, next steps and orders and rules, that don't actually have any images attached to them, and this might present a little bit of a problem, but you can see how they are more abstract and quite hard to have a picture to represent them. So we might think a little bit further about how we represent those kind of more abstract concepts there. So they're basically the 7 category cards that once you click on those will take you to the various entries that come underneath those particular categories. There is also on this left-hand column here the option to search as you can in the regular Term Finder, and we've kind of simplified the instructions there from they're quite complex instructions on the main page. Because part of the thing there is that people have this expectation that, as with Google, you can do full sentence searches, which you can't with this particular search facility. So you can use wildcards, and we encourage people, if they don't know how to spell words, to use a wildcard to generate the word they might be looking for, or the term they might be looking for. The advantage of having this search facility as well is that we can actually monitor what people are searching for within the term bank, and we can see what the unsuccessful searches might be. So if there are particular terms that aren't there, we can look at adding those. And also if there are common misspellings or alternative terms that are being sought for terms that are already in there, we can add those as what we call related search terms, and so people will still find what they're looking for. And on the other side, we've just got links to, of course, the blurred borders page, which is the source for a lot of our content, to Legal Aid New South Wales, and Pam's described the consultative role that they're having with us, and also this Our Kids film, which was created by Greater Sydney Family Law Pathways Network, and it's basically a dramatisation of an Aboriginal worker working in family law, getting help, particularly in terms of mediation within the community. So that's kind of showing a nice video representation of family law in action. So that's the home page of this new portal. Once you click on one of the category cards, and here we're choosing Safe Place, you come to this page where you have all the different words underneath that come underneath that category. So we've got things like daycare, workplace, school, elements like that. I don't think I need to describe those any further, but just to say as well that currently we're looking at around 100 different definitions, different individual pages for this as the first stage for what we're doing with this. Obviously, we might need to think about creating further categories if we get too many within each individual category, because we don't want a really cluttered page. I think at the moment, the way we've structured it, we've got up to 13 or 14. And if you get more than that, then it becomes quite hard to see all the individual headwords underneath it. So that's your category page. Moving on, so once you've clicked on one of these pictures, you get into the individual definitional page, and here we're in the one for daycare. And you can see, as Pam has already described, the kind of different approach to writing a definition for these kind of words. It does end up being, in this particular instance, quite a long definition, because you've got that narrative approach that's being taken here. Essentially, in the first sentence, you've got a straightforward definition of what daycare is, but then there's a little narrative about the importance of it, of this institution, and what it can do for your children. And again, you'll see that emphasis of the word you and you're really engaging with the audience there. And here as well, there's the listen icon and the word, which will take you to the reading out of the definition by an Indigenous voice, and we still have to decide. There's issues about whether it might be a male or a female voice there as well, as Pam has already outlined. So that's the basic structure of what this new development would look like. We have various challenges as we work with this development, working with boundary differences both between federal and state law. So you have things like for example, domestic violence becoming under, first of all, looking at federal and state law, looking at the different way that family law is kind of separated across the different states, and WA has its own system that's a little bit different to how it works in the East. Civil and criminal law jurisdictions, so thinking about family violence, whether that goes into the criminal law jurisdiction, different family law and protection areas of government departments, thinking about how we will separate the different categories for the Indigenous contents pages. As I mentioned, we might need to add to this current set of 7 as we go to add more terms. And thinking also about the textual content. So we'll continue to monitor the text and consult about individual cards, getting a good balance between the definition and explanation of people's roles, and also the formal procedures. And as I mentioned, so talking about procedures and how we present those is going to be one of the more complex aspects of this, because it's hard to illustrate. And then we'll look at how far we use the easy read language, and also to what extent we include colloquialisms, words like putting in kid for child, for example, or bub for baby. And also to what extent we want to add in some Aboriginal English terms, terms like humbugging comes up, for example. All of these ongoing challenges. So just to conclude here, what we're doing now is really a baseline experiment in using visual elements to drive a terminographic database. It's quite a radical redesign of what we've got at the moment. Looking forward to testing its usability with the target community in New South Wales, and so of course the blurred borders was tested on quite a different target community. We're moving it to a different, more urban setting as well. So that's going to be important to test on that particular set of users. but it will certainly be designed with Aboriginal users in mind, and also, as I've mentioned, could be useful for others with limited reading skills. So I'd like to finish there and just thank you very much.
Thank you both, Pam and Adam, for a very interesting presentation. I have two questions here from Tania Kai. First, she would like to thank you for your affirming comments to the organising team about the international context of this conference. And thank you both for your presentation and for sharing your research work, which is really engaging. A couple of questions. One, what digital platform are you using for the portal? And two, given your great work with Indigenous people, do you have a data management plan for the portal, or is this not a research requirement in Australia?
The platform is, it's been customized, designed on the basis of a MySQL database and PHP programming. That was the original, but that was some years ago, but it is the core of a customized structure that we have for it. So it's not out of a standard what do you call it, a standard authoring package for websites. Please, I defer to Adam on further comments on that part of the question.
Yeah, I would simply add that it's basically a website. We don't have an app or anything like that for it. So it is there as a website, but one that we are developing so that it will be available across accessible on a wide range of devices. So it is being extended.
And the second part was, do you have a data management plan for the portal, or is this not a research requirement in Australia?
Yes, this is, I guess, not under the regular research protocol. We certainly have a management program to maintain the database, because, but it doesn't so much hold precious language that might otherwise disappear. So hadn't been actually faced with your question. It's not as if we're working in terms of the major research grant system. We're working as I suppose it's in the end a service provided for a government department. But what you say is a very proper question about how we would maintain the things we've carefully put together for this. And at the moment, they're embedded in the website rather than in a separate kind of repository.
Thank you. I think we're out of time now for further questions. I would like to thank you both for your presentation. It was very informative, and we look forward to hearing more about it and going onto the website. I'll hand that back to you, Mark, now for stopping the recording and directing us back to the main room for the wrap-up, followed by the Australeaks AGM.